The title of vice captain is the single most important title on a crew. In my opinion, it holds even more weight than the title of captain sometimes, simply because the measure of a captain is only as great as his second in command. Throughout the narrative, we've been constantly reminded that the vice captain is how we truly gauge how strong the whole crew is, and most importantly, how strong the captain is. Take Katakuri, who was a shining example of how heavy the weight of the title is. Even in Big Mom's arc, it's not her that is the main antagonist, rather it's Katakuri. Although we clearly know Big Mom is stronger, it's Katakuri who is portrayed to be the biggest threat. Even Beijay pointed out that the number one thing that can ruin their plan to assassinate Big Mom is not Big Mom herself, rather it's Katakuri, her first commander. It's Katakuri you have to go through to give Big Mom any form of trouble. It's him you have to take down to bring down the morale of the Big Mom pirates. And it's him who ends up fighting our main protagonist, Luffy. This portrayal remained consistent with other vice captains as well. Remember in Wano, when Big Mom was coming up the water stream, it was King that kicked their ship off. If this portrayal wasn't even made more obvious, who is the second person that kicks Big Mom's ship? Marco, another vice captain. Vice captains are usually the ones that keep harmful threats away from their captain even without them being there. But there's actually an even more interesting dynamic between the vice captain and captain that most people may not have yet figured out. And that portrayal is the basis of why I am making this very controversial video. I know many people view the vice captain as just a position of strength, but there's an aspect that's even more important. What most people miss is that the vice captain is first and foremost one who embodies the dreams of their captain the most. Think about it, with Kaido, his dream was a dream of strength, where society and justice is only defined by which creatures are the strongest. King's character perfectly aligns with this because King is a Lunarian, one of the strongest creatures in the verse. King too believes that the strongest creatures should rule, and that is their definition of justice. We can clearly see this as he tells Zoro multiple times that he cannot beat him simply due to the difference in their biology. This even remains consistent with Big Mom. Big Mom's dream was to unite all the races in one big family where everyone can eat as much as they want without fear of racial biases. Katakuri is the embodiment of that. He is not entirely human, so he has been discriminated against because of his ill-like mouth. He is also obsessed with eating donuts as he sees fits. And of course, he is first and foremost a family man. Katakuri is especially a great example of this because at times the vice captain can even embody the dreams of their captain even better than they can. While she has this dream of equality and fairness, Big Mom is not at all equal or fair, while Katakuri on the other hand is the only one who is truly invested in making sure none of his family gets bullied for being different. This trend continues with Whitebeard's dream of simply having a family and being a father. This detail to me is the reason why Marco was such a young boy on Whitebeard's crew. He didn't care how old Marco was because at the end, he just wanted a son and he wanted to feel like a real father. Usually the vice captain is the embodiment of the captain's dream, one to one. But with that being said, have you ever considered who is the vice captain of the Straw Hat crew? Yes, the obvious answer is none other than Roronoa Zoro himself, the first mate and the second strongest Straw Hat. But does this line up with the trend of the vice captain being the embodiment of the captain's dreams? This begs the question, what is Luffy's dreams? Although I am not 100% certain on what his dream is, I believe Oda gave us the most obvious clue. In chapter 1075, before being defeated, Kaido asks Luffy, what type of world do you want to create? And Luffy simply answered, a world where all my friends can eat as much food as they want. Boom, there we have it. As much theories as there have been on Luffy's dream, I believe the simplest answer is the best answer considering Luffy's character. Luffy's dream has something to do with food. And guess which Straw Hat's main character is based on feeding anyone who's hungry. Sanji. With that being said, let me throw a very interesting yet controversial idea out there. Sanji has always been the vice captain of the Straw Hat crew. This video will slightly deviate from my usual crazy theories. This time it will be more of an analysis on a very controversial topic that I hope you guys enjoy all the same. And even if you end up disagreeing, I'm sure you can find a few ideas you like very much about this analysis. So let's dive into why I think Sanji has always been Luffy's vice captain. But first, let me dispel this idea that Zoro is the vice captain. First, I want you to understand that this is not me downplaying Zoro's role. Rather, I will actually upscale Zoro's role. See, Zoro was never meant to be Luffy's vice captain. Rather, he was always meant to be Luffy's equal. I believe the dynamic between Luffy and Zoro is the same dynamic between Roger and Whitebeard or Shanks and Mihawk. This may be surprising to a lot of people, but I believe it's always been clear because of a very important narrative portrayal of Zoro. Throughout the whole narrative, we have instances of people saying that they are surprised that Zoro is subordinate to Luffy. Mad Monk Uruj pointed this out in Sabaody when he said he's only the first mate, but he has 120 million berries. He doesn't look like the type to obey anyone. Pay attention to that line. He doesn't look like the type to obey anyone. While many people may use this as an obvious reason why Zoro is the vice captain, I actually think this works against him. In fact, we've actually never seen a vice captain portrayed like that. It's uniquely Zoro who's portrayed as an untamable wild beast who shouldn't be subordinate to anyone. No one says, oh my god, look at King the Wildfire, it's hard to believe he's a subordinate. Or look at Katakuri, it's hard to believe he's a subordinate. So why is it Zoro who uniquely gets this treatment? If Zoro's not the type to obey anyone, why is he in Luffy's crew? Well, as the Mad Monk points out, it's because Luffy is special. But I feel like no one has really decompressed what he actually means by that. I believe that the reason Luffy is special is that he's done something that the generations couldn't do. Luffy has managed to make his equal become a member of his crew. See, Roger was not able to do this with Whitebeard. Although they were close friends, they were on opposite crews. Shanks also had this same problem with Mihawk. In fact, there's a popular theory cooked up by Hidden Island that perhaps at some point Mihawk was on Shanks' crew, but they had some form of disagreement and they split. Although it's not verifiable if this is true or not, I don't believe it's far from the narrative Oda wants to write. So it's consistent that Luffy, the one who will bring the dawn, succeeds where the others failed. He succeeded where they failed by building a crew dynamic where no one is really subordinate to the other, and not even the captain is a superior. As we've seen multiple times in the story, different Straw Hats have disputes with Luffy and have set him straight when he needs to be set straight. See, Luffy excels as a captain where the others failed by being flexible to his crew's individual will. The reason I believe this is important is that it highlights why Zoro is not the vice captain. See, the title of vice captain is a leadership position. I believe that Zoro is very similar to someone like Mihawk, who is strong but not necessarily a leader. That is the difference between Shanks and Mihawk. I don't believe it's strength, but rather it's the ability to lead and be part of a family-like team. Zoro surpasses Mihawk in that regard, but it's only because of Luffy's leadership surpassing Shanks' style of leadership. We can clearly see this because Shanks' crew calls him boss or chief, while Luffy's crew calls him Luffy. If it is true that Mihawk and Shanks may have been on the same crew, it's likely Mihawk would not want to be Shanks' subordinate. But just because you don't want to be a subordinate does not mean you also want to be a captain, which is why Mihawk has no crew of his own. This exemplifies who Zoro is as a character. If Zoro did not have Luffy, he would not even want to be in a crew. He would be more of a lone ranger just like Mihawk. I bring this up because a vice captain is someone that is the glue of the crew and most importantly, a team leader, as I said. This also goes back to the vice captain and the captain's dream coinciding. An important thing to note here is that the most captains and vice captains have a dream that is a unifying dream. Big Mom's dream is to unify races. Whitebeard's dream is to unify a family. Kaido's dream is essentially to start a giant war because he feels like war is when people are truly equal. Emphasis on equal, a unifying goal, although a twisted way. Roger's dream was to turn the world upside down, emphasis on the world, which is a unifying concept. So if Mihawk and Shanks were on a crew, the reason why they may not have worked out is partly due to this idea. Mihawk's goal to be the world's strongest swordsman is not at all a unifying goal. In fact, it's a goal that can directly oppose Shanks' dream if Shanks was a swordsman who Mihawk needed to defeat. The reason Zoro did not have this problem is that Luffy is not a swordsman and therefore doesn't get in the way of his dream. But it's important to note their dreams don't really coincide. But if they did, Zoro would not be on Luffy's crew. Even Zoro pointed this out very early on in chapter 6 when he says, "You are making me a pirate, but if I have to abandon my dream for any reason, I'll make you commit harakiri." To me, this statement is pointing out exactly as I've said. Zoro doesn't see himself as a subordinate to Luffy. He also believes he can achieve his dream even without Luffy. This is a major point of consideration because all of the other Straw Hats, although they had a dream, it's only after meeting Luffy they actually embark on achieving their dream. If Luffy didn't come, they most likely may not have done it. While on the other hand, Zoro was already en route to become the world's strongest swordsman. Okay, all of this just sounds like Zoro gas, and all the more reason why he is the best vice captain, right? Well, yes and no. Yes, Zoro's strength and ambition is on par with Luffy, but no, this does not equate to being the vice captain, at least not on Luffy's crew. The reason being, Luffy and Zoro are the same beast, and that makes them incompatible to have a vice captain and captain dynamic. What do I mean by this? See, the reason why the other generations couldn't succeed at what Luffy succeeded in was primarily because the two equals of that time were too similar. Think about it like this: a crew with two people like Roger and Whitebeard is ineffective because they are both smoke demons who at times can be troublesome. You can't have two archetypes of the same kind in the crew leading the crew. They would conflict on most things and they would end up fighting to settle the dispute. In fact, this is exactly what happened with Dory and Broggy. They are two peas of the same pod, so they would end up fighting themselves for hundreds of years instead of actually leading their crew. This is in fact an intentional depiction by Oda to show the true value of having a vice captain. See, a vice captain differs from the captain in their style of their approach. Take Zoro and Luffy for example, and look how they dealt with CP9 in Enies lobby. They barge in with no plan, no intel on what's going on, and they wound up getting tossed across the city and ended up both getting stuck in buildings. This is why Zoro is Luffy's equal rather than his captain. And what I mean by equal is not that they are exactly the same strength, rather they have the same exact approaches to most things. They're both beasts that prioritize their instincts over intelligence and plans. Two people like that cannot share a vice captain to captain dynamic because the vice captain is supposed to do things that the captain usually wouldn't do or can't do. The vice captain is supposed to be the logical, thinking, and planning leader of the crew that helps keep the captain out of trouble. The reason why Zoro can't be Luffy's vice captain is not because he's weaker than Sanji, it's because he's too similar to Luffy. Although Luffy succeeded at recruiting his equal, he still needs a vice captain who can do what both him and Zoro cannot. This is where someone like Sanji comes in. In that same arc where Luffy and Zoro got outclassed by CP9 and stuck in buildings, what is Sanji doing? Sanji has already gathered clues to figure out Robin's true motivations. While they were stuck, Sanji was able to gather that Robin is being forced by CP9 against her own will. He's already discovered where they are taking her and has already boarded the sea train to free her. This is the making of a true vice captain, someone that can succeed where the captain fails. Oda makes this very clear in Water 7 as I mentioned, but he continues to drive the point home in other arcs as well. We can also see examples of this in Alabasta, while Zoro and Luffy are both attacking Crocodile's palace without any plan and getting captured. Who comes to freedom after outsmarting Crocodile? Sanji, of course. It's also important to mention that Sanji hatched this plan alongside Chopper to deceive Crocodile and get him outside of the palace so that they can sneak in. This is an example of his natural talent of being a good team leader. He does the very same thing in Skypiea. In Skypiea, Sanji was able to hatch a strategy where Usopp distracted Enel while Sanji was in the Arc Maxim destroying it from the inside. This then leads to Sanji's legendary I needed a light scene, where he pushes Nami and Usopp to go as he put himself in between them and an L Thor. Mind you, all this is happening while Luffy has temporarily failed his mission to take down Enel. In Luffy's absence, Sanji stepped in to play the role of vice captain and once again bail him out. He continues to do stuff like this throughout the whole narrative. But to me, the most underrated time Oda highlights this is in Dressrosa. In Dressrosa, Sanji protects the crew against Doflamingo, but it's not so much in protecting the crew that Sanji shines, it's in his leadership. We get a great example of this when Sanji was caught by Doflamingo's parasitic strings. He was able to tell the crew to leave him behind using a coup de burst. Although Law ended up saving them, it's made clear that when Luffy is gone, Sanji is seen as the captain. Especially when you consider in that chapter, Nami refers to the crew as the Twirly Hat Pirates. Of course, because of Sanji's swirly eyebrows. See, this is where Sanji shines, when he is with other members of the crew that look to him for guidance for both his IQ and his strength. While Zoro usually shines when he is more so near Luffy rather than when he's actually leading the crew. In fact, throughout the whole narrative, we can find far more examples of Sanji leading a team within the crew than Zoro doing the same. This is further emphasized in chapter 730, when Luffy gives Sanji permission to lead an attack against Big Mom's ship. The reason this moment is important is because Sanji led his own faction of the Straw Hats to go against Big Mom, and they were separated from the crew for many days on the Sunny. So for a moment, Sanji was the captain of the Sunny. This is further substantiated in chapter 810, which is the chapter Sanji's group arrives at Zou, and lo and behold, the name of that chapter is Twirly Hat Crew Arrives. To me, these moments emphasize my point that Sanji is often in much more leadership positions than Zoro. This again, not to undersell Zoro, it just so happens that Zoro shines the most when he's in battle alongside Luffy rather than leading a team. In fact, Zoro's greatest moments are usually tied to Luffy personally, than rather being tied to the whole crew. Zoro is usually close to Luffy, acting as his personal bodyguard and a voice for reason when Luffy needs it, while Sanji's greatest moments are when he's protecting the crew and strategizing coordinated plans even without Luffy there. This is even more clear to see in their respective sacrificial moments, for example. In Sanji's I Have a Light scene, he did this leading a small group of the Straw Hats and protecting them from Enel. While in Zoro's Nothing Happened moment, the emphasis was on his relationship with Luffy personally. Again, this is not to downplay Zoro, rather it is meant to give Zoro his much due respect as a person closer to Luffy as a fighter and as a friend than most of the crew. Zoro's place on the crew is most tied to the personal respect and symbolic relationship he has with Luffy, although of course he loves all his crewmates. But is this what a vice captain is? No, I don't think this is what Oda has emphasized the role to be. A vice captain is not always necessarily who is closest in strength to the captain. Rather, I believe Oda has made it clear, a vice captain is someone who can lead the crew when the captain isn't there. The reason Zoro has never had this role is because him and Luffy are the same, as I mentioned. They amplify each other individually, but when it comes to tackling situations that need a bit more brains, they both usually make the same mistakes, as we see in Alabasta and Water 7. It's Sanji who is usually taking the mantle of vice captain because he's able to succeed in situations where Luffy and Zoro will fail. Whole Cake is a great example of this. This arc exemplifies why Sanji is more fit for the vice captain role. People like to think that if Zoro was in Whole Cake Island, the Straw Hats would have much more success, but I beg to differ. Zoro is a powerhouse, yes, but this isn't always the most important thing in situations such as Whole Cake. The goal Luffy has at Whole Cake was to infiltrate Big Mom's territory, get Sanji back, and get out of there safely. I don't think this mission would go as smoothly if Zoro was thrown in the mix. See, what most people underrate about Sanji in Whole Cake is this. Sanji was able to enter and leave a Yonko's territory with barely any injuries. If Zoro was at Whole Cake, I don't believe this goes the same way. Zoro first and foremost is a fighter and would definitely go into this with many fights. And although he would win, I think he would attract the most unwanted attention, as we see in Wano. And no matter how strong he is, the numbers would eventually overwhelm him. Just consider that this is a Yonko territory, where the second strongest person is not even the Yonko herself. There's no time to have long and drawn out fights with anyone because it would lower the chance of a successful escape. While Sanji, on the other hand, handled this situation with that in mind. As much as I wanted to see Sanji fight in this arc, I must say he made the best decision by not doing so. He was smart to do just enough as a combatant to get strong people out of the way of their escape without challenging anyone to a standoff. He also knew that the best way out of this situation is not through beating Big Mom, because of course they wouldn't be able to, even if Zoro was there. Instead, he understood that to defeat Big Mom, you must knock her out with flavor. I know many people don't find what Sanji did to be impressive, but consider this. No one in the world could have done what Sanji did. This is a county made of food, with the greatest chefs in the world, who took weeks just to make that cake, and Sanji baked a better one in just a few hours, and successfully gave it to her. This is what it means to be a true vice captain, to be able to do things which are even impossible to your captain. Now, this is all going back to Luffy's dream of feeding everyone. And as we see, Sanji was able to feed even Big Mom's big appetite. I believe this puts a whole new meaning behind what Luffy told Sanji in Whole Cake. I cannot be the Pirate King without you. Now, we must not downplay the significance of what Luffy just said. Take into consideration that Luffy has proclaimed he will be the Pirate King since the beginning of the story, even in the most difficult circumstances where people told Luffy to abandon his dreams. He never did. But for the first time in Luffy's life, he openly says, I cannot be the Pirate King without you. It's even more profound when you consider that every Straw Hat has proclaimed Luffy will be the Pirate King, while Sanji is the first Straw Hat that Luffy has told he cannot be the Pirate King without him. It sends chills down my spine as I dissect this. It's even more emotionally moving when you consider the many parallels behind Sanji and Luffy's dreams. Think about it. Luffy wants to become the Pirate King, and the only way he can do this is to find an unknown location, which is impossible to find and most people don't even think it exists. Sanji's dream of the All Blue is about finding a sea that's impossible to find and most people don't even think it exists. At the end of Luffy's dream, we know he wants to create a world where all his friends can eat food. And of course, one of Sanji's driving ideologies is to feed everyone, as I've mentioned. A very cool thing to note here is, have you noticed that before Luffy usually defeats an antagonist, lately it's after he had a nice meal. The parallels don't stop there either. We can see even through the people that inspire Luffy and Sanji's dream the most. Shanks and Zeph. Shanks gave his left arm to protect a young boy who had the same dream as his captain. Zeph gave his left foot to protect a young boy who shared the same dream of the All Blue. The vice captain and captain relationship must always have a symbiotic dream and desire. Another great example of this is with Blackbeard's crew. Have you ever asked yourself, who is the vice captain of Blackbeard's crew? Now, it will be simple to say Shiryu, right? Because it's obviously portrayed Shiryu is the second strongest on Blackbeard's crew. But does this suggest he's the vice captain? Well, if it does, that would mean that Aokiji is the new vice captain, because of course, no one argues that Aokiji is not stronger than Shiryu. See, strength is not the number one indicator for who will be vice captain. Like I said, it's dreams and desires. So with all this being said, who is then the true vice captain of Blackbeard's crew? Well, here's an interesting idea, but an idea I believe makes the most sense. The true vice captain of Blackbeard's crew is none other than Van Augur. Van Augur has been a very hyped figure in the community lately and is very much deserved. If you've seen him in the anime, he was able to infiltrate Whole Cake with the help of Aokiji. He was even able to destroy Cracker's soldiers in one shot. But even with this feat, we know he's not the strongest. Aokiji is. He is, although, the most reliable. Even going all the way back to Blackbeard's fight against Ace, he was the first to attack Ace with no hesitation. Just recently in Blackbeard vs. Law fight, he was again the most useful person to have near you. Using his warp fruit, he was able to teleport Burgess to the island. He was able to force Law to put his guard up as he shot him. But the most important thing he did in his fight is to put Blackbeard in check, something a vice captain would do. Take a look at what he says here after Law landed the shock willy on Blackbeard. This is what happens when you enter in without any plan, and he was ready to teleport Blackbeard away at a moment's notice. To me, this truly shows his value as someone that the captain can rely on as a second leader and a different thinker. Van Augur also passes the biggest vice captain test, sharing your captain's dream. In chapter 1107, Saturn asks the Blackbeard pirates what is their goal. Van Augur calmly yet boldly responds, "The world." He basically said, "We want everything," which reminded me of Blackbeard's Yami Yami no Mi, a black hole that can swallow up everything in its path. Blackbeard's goals may also align with Rock's goals when it comes to being king of the world. So naturally, Van Augur replied that he wants the world, a true vice captain and captain dynamic. Shout out to Van Augur truly, but we are here to talk about Sanji, the true vice captain of the Straw Hat Pirates. Although I'm very sure that this idea is a fringe perspective, I believe the current arc makes this much more believable. In Egghead Island, Sanji's vice captain traits are on full display. Starting from the very beginning of the arc, we see something very interesting. We get a situation where both Luffy and Zoro are away from the main crew, and Sanji is the one leading the crew into the Labo phase. This scene in the anime makes it clear that Sanji is the leader, as they are literally following behind him with every step that he takes. Like I said, this is where Sanji shines the most, where he literally becomes a team leader while Luffy is away. This goes on as they enter the room with S-Shark. When they first meet S-Shark, the crew had no idea what to think. Of the few ideas, Usopp came up with the possibility that S-Shark is Jinbei's son. Nami came up with the possibility that Jinbei turned into a kid. Those two were both wrong, but Sanji came up with the correct possibility, that Jinbei's appearance is a coincidence, and this is a whole different person who is most likely a threat. Immediately, Sanji knew to put Jinbei's appearance aside and consider S-Shark a threat. After S-Shark reveals himself to be a threat, Sanji was able to quickly kick him away. Sanji continues to shine this arc yet again in his second interaction with S Shark. As Nami screams, Sanji instantly comes to her aid and kicks S Sharks away. Now understand how crazy of a feat this is. You have to understand that Sanji was in a whole nother room. Not only was he able to hear Nami scream, but he was able to use his observation haki to directly pinpoint exactly where she was and was able to come there before S Shark even touched her. The vice captain portrayal doesn't stop there. In the following chapter, we get an epic Sanji feat and an even more epic portrayal. In one of the most shocking panels I've ever seen, Sanji is tanking a Seraphim's punch, while Luffy and Zoro are in the panel underneath complaining how the Seraphim are too durable for their attacks. This is shocking because if you've never read this manga before and you saw that sequence of panels, you would immediately think Sanji is the strongest person there. Although we know Sanji is not stronger than those two, we must also not underrate Sanji's strength. Of course, it's not just the narrative that is the basis behind the reason why Sanji is the vice captain, but it's also strength as well. Although Sanji is the third strongest on the crew, he is not lagging very far behind those two, especially in this arc. In this arc alone, Sanji was able to overpower a Seraphim twice. He was able to then tank a Fishman karate attack to the face with both his face and cigarette intact. You gotta know how crazy that is. Fishman karate usually uses water in the air to strike, yet Sanji's cigarette, which should be on fire, doesn't even go out. But anyways, this interaction is even more profound to me because Sanji unleashes some of the very interesting dialogue here against S Shark. It's been a common critique of Sanji that he's not willing to do whatever necessary to get the job done. As a fighter, Sanji's morals keeps him from doing what's the most necessary against women, especially to complete his mission. But it's not even just women. Even if we look at the Sanji versus Queen fight, Sanji had a mental breakdown in the middle of the fight because he did not want to become like his Germa siblings. But if we take a look at what Sanji says here, he seems to be showing signs of being quite the opposite of his usual self as he kicks S Shark into the wall. He says, "I don't give a damn if you're a kid or another Jinbei. I'll be your judge, jury, and executioner." This is some spicy talk here. I've never seen Sanji say that he would execute somebody if need be. And although I don't think he would do it, I have to respect that this is the dialogue Oda choose to write in. To me, this is a sign that Oda plans for Sanji to no longer have those weaknesses of heart, which would truly make him deserving of that vice captain title because that is his last hurdle, a mental hurdle. It's not only in mental strength Sanji has grown in this arc, but it's also strength overall. Just recently in chapter 1107, Sanji was able to deflect a laser directly from Kizaru, and according to Frankie and Kizaru's reactions, deflecting light is an almost impossible feat. So mind you, as I'm focusing on Sanji's character as to why he's the vice captain, I am also basing it on his growing strength. Even so, strength is but one facet to Sanji's amazing leadership. A couple chapters ago, in chapter 1105, we get a great example of this with Sanji's communication with the rest of the Straw Hats. Quick, while Vegapunk get their attention, hightail it to the vacuum, go meet up with the other back at the end of the labo phase. Not only is he communicating effectively and giving orders, he is also getting a status check on the rest of the crew. "Nami-san, it's me, what's your status up there?" Not only is he gathering information for the current situation, he's also reassuring Bonnie that everything will be alright, both being an emotional leader and a high IQ leader. Sanji is the only Straw Hat right now that knows everything going on around the island, even while Luffy does not. Again, showing how the vice captain is the glue of the whole crew and is constantly more knowledgeable than even the captain. And if you look throughout the whole narrative, this isn't something new for Sanji. He's done it in multiple arcs as I mentioned, Water 7, Alabasta, Dressrosa, and in Whole Cake, and he's doing it right now in Egghead Island. But I know, with every piece of evidence that I presented, most of you will still disagree and say, well, the vice captain is always the one that fights the second strongest on the crew. Well, now that we have Sanji and Luffy about to fight Saturn and Kizaru, I don't believe this argument will stand the test of time. As the fight between Kizaru and Sanji fastly approaches, I believe that Sanji will prove why he is the true vice captain. That's the Sanji theory and analysis, guys. Hope you enjoyed watching and listening, and drop a like and subscribe if you want me to do more of these in the future. Although Sanji is my favorite character, I could make awesome videos like this for Zoro or any of your favorite Straw Hats as well, so let me know in the comments. But wait, before you go, I know you have one final argument as to why Sanji cannot be the vice captain. You think that the vice captain of the Pirate King's crew must have Conqueror's Haki. Well, I agree. So check out my infamous Sanji is a Conqueror theory video right after this. See you there. Middle way out.